Hey everyone, welcome to Pagan Happy Hour. I am so excited to talk with you all today. I hope you had a good week so far. And we have a really fun chat scheduled for today. We are going to be talking about hand fasting and pagan wedding traditions. This was a recommended topic from some of my patrons, and it was something that I hadn't really discussed much on my channel yet. So I thought it'd be fun to go over this topic with you all and get your ideas and opinions. And if you are new here, welcome. I do these live pagan happy hour chats every Friday at 5 p.m. Central. And they're really designed to be a way for us all to connect and chat about different pagan and witchy topics. So I'm going to be looking over here periodically, looking and reading all of your comments and your questions. I'm going to bring your thoughts and ideas into the conversation. So this isn't just me talking to a camera, it's really a dialogue here. And, if you really enjoy these pagan happy hours and the content I create, you can, of course, support my channel. There are two ways to do that. You can use the Super Chats button at the bottom of the chat where you can donate any amount. And what that will do is it will pop up your question or comment really big on my screen. So that way I'll be able to definitely see it and bring your thoughts and ideas into the conversation. And the other great way you can support this show is through Patreon, which I have, of course, linked down below. And I do run a Discord community for other fellow pagans to chat and share resources with. So, of course, you get access to the Discord community if you choose to become a Patreon. So, now that we got that out of the way, let me cue the drink music. And why don't you all in the chat tell me where you're from and what you are drinking today? So let's see. Today I am having a Lagunitas IPA. One of my go-tos. I really love Lagunitas. They make a lot of great beers, but I'm trying a new one called the Super Cluster. We'll see how it goes. And let's see, I can see you guys chiming in now. Looks like we have people from North Carolina, Australia, UK, Seattle, Pennsylvania, Minnesota, Chicago, Massachusetts, Canada. Let's see, a few people it looks like are from the UK today. So thank you all for joining me. I had a thought too, since this is Pagan Happy Hour. I'm curious from you guys if you happen to know any pagan-owned breweries or winemakers or anything like that. It'd be really fun for me to collaborate, with a pagan-owned brewery or company, so let me know if you happen to know anyone in that industry. I'd love to give them a shout out and, drink their beer on these. So, we got a lot to cover today. But before we get into it, I do have another announcement. So I am trying something new for the Tarot Tuesdays that I do. So I know not all of you are interested in divination or tarot, but last year I released my tarot deck. It's called the Key Tarot. I spent about 2 years creating it with my friend Jamie. And for the past few months, we've been doing Tarot Tuesdays, which is a free educational workshop about tarot. And we've been doing those on our Instagram channel for the deck. And we decided it'd be fun to maybe bring it over to YouTube. So we actually created a brand new channel called the Key Tarot. And I have the channel linked down below. So we're going to start offering free tarot workshops every Tuesday at 5 p.m. Central. So if you are someone that is interested in learning more about tarot or different divination methods, definitely subscribe to the channel. Join us for our first workshop on YouTube next Tuesday at 5 p.m. Central, and it should be really fun. So again, I have that link down below. Now let's get into it. So weddings are a tough topic, right? I feel like right off the bat, it can get overwhelming. At least for me, maybe for you guys. I don't know how you guys feel, but I feel like the topic of weddings in general, it just can be a bit overwhelming. At least here in America, it means so much money, so much stress. I myself got married in 2018, and I had a pretty small wedding of about 50 people. And it was still a very complex, stressful thing to orchestrate. And as much fun as it was, I'm kind of glad it's over and done with, if I'm honest. But weddings have, of course, been something that people have been doing since quite a while. And our wedding traditions have evolved considerably. So today, when we're talking about hand fasting and pagan wedding traditions, we're really looking at the evolution of these traditions over time. Like everything with paganism, it often gets like intermixed and confused with the whole Christian conversion time. And then there's always a reclaiming aspect where we attempt to kind of reclaim these traditions. So it kind of is a jumble and a bit difficult to unpack. But we're going to get into that because I'm going to share with you a bit about the history behind hand fasting and pagan wedding traditions. And then we're going to chat about some of the issues around weddings in modern day society and the pros, the cons of having a pagan wedding and what these pagan traditions might look like in a modern context. I see a question here from Jenna asking if I sneaked in any pagan traditions for my wedding. Not specifically, like at least not known to the public. I mean, I did do a few little spells ahead of time just for myself to kind of bring me a good luck and things like that. But I didn't do a traditional hand fasting or any other specific traditions like jumping over the broom. And I'll get into that, in a little bit on some of the difficulties of choosing to have a pagan wedding and how I think many of us really struggle with making that choice when we have relatives that, are very anti-pagan. And for a lot of us, it's not worth the stress. So I do wish I had incorporated some more traditional pagan elements into my wedding, but honestly, I would have been so stressed the entire time about upsetting certain relatives that I don't really know if it would have been worth it for me. But I am totally a fan of pagan weddings, and I love the concept. So yeah, let's get into it. So if you're unfamiliar, hand fasting is really just kind of a term for a wedding or a betrothal. Hand fasting actually means a few different things, which we'll get into, but it's mostly a term that's coming from Great Britain and Ireland. And nowadays we use it to define like a pagan wedding. You might call it a hand fasting, but it's a really old term. And, a lot of people, when I was doing the research, mentioned that this comes from the ancient Celts and that this was the traditional ceremony that was performed by a druid. So when we're saying hand fasting, we might be talking about the ancient Celtic wedding ceremony. So on the one hand, that's really cool. That means this practice is really old. Though there is a caveat here. I found a lot of resources telling me that hand fasting goes back to the ancient Celts, but none of those resources were able to actually link any literature or archaeological sources to validate that claim. So I'm not entirely positive how far this tradition goes back, if it really does go back to the ancient Celts. It's likely that those sources of evidence just don't exist, right? Because we know that the Druids didn't keep records or write things down. And even if they were using cords to tie the hands together for hand fasting, that might not have survived, over the centuries or millennia for us to dig up and uncover later. So it's entirely possible and plausible that they did do this type of hand fasting ritual. But as far as I know, there aren't any specific literary sources that I was able to find, though this is just from, looking online. I don't really have access to a great library where I am right now. So I'd love to know if you guys have found any resources about ancient Celtic wedding traditions, because I'd love to look into that more. But anyway, the general theory is that it does come from the ancient Celts. Now, it has, of course, evolved and changed over time, like any pagan tradition. But when we think about hand fasting, you're literally thinking about the tying together of hands. And some people even do it in kind of a infinity loop scenario where you're holding on to each other's arms, or the two partners are. And then the priest, whether that be a druid or just a modern wedding officiant, ties the hands together with a cord or a rope or a ribbon. And there are many different even knots when it comes to how you tie the two hands together. I did find a video on YouTube earlier today that goes over how to do different knots for hand fasting. So I linked that down in my description if it's something you want to learn more about, or if you're considering adding in hand fasting into your own wedding ceremony. So, it's kind of a cool tradition. I like it visually. I think it's really stunning. I kind of wish I had done a traditional hand fasting with the rope and the cord. I think it's kind of a beautiful sentiment. But again, we don't really know the exact origins of this specific tradition. Now, there are some kind of other aspects to this which get a little weird. So the hand fasting didn't just refer to the actual clasping of the hands and putting the rope on during the wedding ceremony part. Hand fasting was kind of like an engagement, and it would be done sometimes historically before the actual wedding took place. So now I'm talking more about the time period after the conversion of Europe to Christianity. So this is when they took some of those hand fasting traditions, like the rope around the hands, but might have modified it a bit. So this idea is kind of weird. So not only was it considered kind of like an engagement, your little hand fasting ceremony, it was also binding too. So it was like a mini wedding before the big wedding. But I've heard people refer to it as kind of like a trial run for the couple, which, when you think about it, is quite suspect and leads to certain issues I can see. For example, if it is the case that a couple would have a hand fasting ceremony, say a year before their official church wedding ceremony, this meant that the groom could partake in all the benefits of being the husband. I'll just say that. And this was considered a trial run for the marriage. So I don't really like the idea of this, if I'm honest, right? Because say by the end of the year, if he gets bored or doesn't like her, at that point, he's allowed to just say, oh, I don't really want to go through with the full wedding, and can release that commitment of the hand fasting. So obviously the woman would be kind of screwed here, because it's not going to be easy for her then to find a mate. Of course, we're talking about historical times. So there are some problematic issues with the hand fasting ceremony. Now, I'd love to see some sources here about this, because I don't know if this aspect, the trial run period of hand fasting, happened in pagan times, or if this was something that started to happen after the conversion to Christianity in Europe. So I don't know. Um, on the one hand, it was kind of practical because this type of system of hand fasting often occurred in really rural communities after the conversion to Christianity, where there might not be a priest nearby. So the couple would do the hand fasting ceremony while, they sent message to get a priest to eventually come to their remote town to do the formal church wedding. So yeah, that makes sense. You might not want to just like wait until a priest shows up to get married. But there are, of course, some problematic issues here with this whole trial year of hand fasting. Let me check your comments real quick while I have a sip of my drink and see what you guys think about this aspect of hand fasting. Great comment here I see from Drakara says, I believe I've read that ancient Celtic culture didn't have the emphasis on virginity, so a woman's worth wouldn't change in that hypothetical situation. Good point. I think that's true to a certain extent. And yeah, we don't know when this whole trial run aspect of hand fasting began, because in ancient Celtic culture, if they did the hand fasting ceremony, that was just the wedding, so this whole kind of separate system probably occurred, I'm guessing, after the conversion to Christianity. I see Kylie says, I wish we did 1-year trial runs now. That sounds great to me. Yeah, I mean, I think nowadays it makes sense. I lived with my boyfriend for like 8 years before we got married. So yeah, trial runs are great nowadays, but I could see why that would be problematic for a woman back in the day. Let's see. Olivia's asking if my husband's pagan. He is not. So yeah, he's very supportive of my beliefs and what I do, for YouTube and everything like that, but he is not pagan. Let's see. Great comments. Elfie is asking if there are other wedding traditions except Celtic, like Nordic, Roman, or even Egyptian. Yes, of course. There are different wedding traditions across all pagan societies for the most part, and they all differ to a certain extent. The Norse tradition, I believe, is somewhat similar to the ancient Celt tradition with the hand fasting. But they did have their own system. I see someone mentioning here oath rings. I need to look into that more. But for the purposes of this live, I'm mostly going to be talking about hand fasting, which is the most popular form of modern pagan weddings. Though I would love to see more variations of modern types of pagan weddings inspired from other pagan cultures like ancient Egypt or, heathen and things like that. So yeah, great question. So another thing which I think is cool too, so again, we're talking about the time period after the conversion to Christianity. The hand fasting ceremony itself, it didn't need to occur in a religious church or a religious site of any kind. It usually occurred in the home of the bride, so it was a more simple, modest ceremony. Or it even occurred in taverns, apparently. So the hand fasting back in the day, at least after the conversion, was a very simple affair. You might just have a couple other people as witnesses, and then it was, later when the priest arrives to the village and then you do the proper church ceremony, that's when you might, have invited other people. And, when you think about wedding traditions, they have changed and evolved so much over time. A lot of the things we think nowadays as being traditional are pretty new concepts. The concept of wearing white, for example, that was something that started with Queen Victoria, who chose to wear white. So she started that trend, but before then, women didn't wear white. So of course, if you were doing a pagan wedding, that means there's no obligation for you to wear white. You can, of course, if you want, but historically, the tradition of wearing white is a pretty new concept. Also, the tradition of having a ton of people there and inviting a huge guest list, that's pretty new too. Weddings throughout history tended to be much more modest affairs. They were, you would wear a dress that you already owned. Maybe you would make a nice one, but you would wear it after the wedding too, because of course garments were very expensive. And the concept of rings is interesting. Apparently, with hand fasting, you would have some type of exchange, and rings were one of the options, though also sometimes people would break a coin in half and just they'd have one side of the coin. So it wasn't just the idea of rings, and the idea of a couple wearing the ring, so a man wearing a wedding band, that didn't really get popularized until much later. Everything that we think about weddings, when you really look into these traditions, they're not as old as you think. So you shouldn't necessarily feel too much pressure to follow them if they're not your vibe. But hand fasting, as we're learning about, is pretty darn old. So it is neat to think about this ancient wedding tradition. So eventually, after the conversion, England did, for a time, ban hand fasting ceremonies. So hand fasting was not legal for a while. And then there's actually a spot in Scotland just across the border. The first town you reach in Scotland, there's a blacksmith shop, and plenty of couples would get married over this anvil. There's a famous anvil. I just imagine, it sounds very romantic. All these couples who want to get married, they don't want to wait, for some priest, or they don't want to have to abide by certain rules. They just rush off to Scotland to do a quick elopement at the first blacksmith shop they come across. So there's a lot of really kind of cute, interesting stories related to the history of weddings in the British Isles. But yeah, it is really neat. And of course, this is a topic that, can go on and on and on. There are so many different layers and ways to look at this topic, lenses to look at it through. So, I'm only, scratching the surface here. Now, one thing I think that's interesting is hand fasting really phased out of popularity for a good long time. You had paganism, where hand fasting was the norm. Then the conversion to Christianity in Europe, where they kind of brought in some hand fasting traditions as kind of this trial marriage, 1-year thing before the proper ceremony. And then eventually that was outlawed. But then eventually the witchcraft laws were repealed. People started getting more interested in pagan traditions again. So this is when the more modern neo-pagan movement starts. So we're talking like the 1950s here. And figures like Gerald Gardner and Doreen Valiente, they were wanting to find a wedding ceremony that wasn't baked into Christianity. So they looked back and kind of rediscovered the system of hand fasting. And they're kind of responsible for repopularizing the word hand fasting, repopularizing the concept of the binding of the hands with cords as part of a pagan wedding. So that's when the term hand fasting kind of came back into public consciousness. And that's when people who were, becoming neo-pagan, modern pagans, we started to use the term again to refer to modern pagan wedding ceremonies. So, even if you say hand fasting, that doesn't even necessarily mean you're following the Celtic path, for example. It's really kind of a catch-all term for modern pagan weddings. Let's see. I'm just checking your comments here. Draven has a great comment saying that in Prince William and Kate's wedding, a hand fasting was part of it, even if it was anglicized. Yeah, I think especially Scotland and Ireland still do a lot of hand fasting components to their modern day ceremonies, and the cord or the rope that goes around the hands, it's a great, easy thing to incorporate in a not necessarily pagan wedding. It's a way to kind of honor ancient traditions. So even, Christians who obviously aren't pagan might choose to incorporate hand fasting as more a symbol of Irish or Scottish or English heritage. So you'll see that too. Even if you look at wedding sites like The Knot, or like Bridal Magazine, for example, sometimes they'll talk about hand fasting or incorporating that. And for them, it's more just of a way to honor your heritage or ancestry, and not so much of a spiritual bond between the couple like it would have been for a pagan context. Because of course, that's what it really is with the binding of the hands. It's meant to symbolize the union of the couple, that they are now one. So it's meant to be kind of a spiritual thing, not just a way to honor your heritage or ancestry. Though, of course, it can be both. But I think a lot of modern wedding articles you'll see about hand fasting really miss the mark when they leave out any kind of religious or spiritual component to the practice and make it just about kind of the visual. Let's see. So yeah, just checking your comments here. Sarah has a great comment asking about Catholic weddings. She says, isn't there something in Catholic weddings where they drape cloth over the couple's hands? Yeah, I believe there is. So this idea, has evolved and changed throughout time. And especially with Catholicism, when you look into Catholicism, you're never far from paganism. I always say that if I were a Christian, which I'm definitely not ever going to be, I would be a Catholic, because Catholicism has so much paganism in it, right? And you look at certain saints like Saint Bridget, who's really the Celtic goddess Bridget, the holidays, Easter, for example, with the bunnies and the eggs. Of course, that's Ostara, Christmas is Yule, all of these things that I've talked about for years on my channel. When Europe became Christian, these traditions didn't just disappear. They were part of people's culture, and they made sure that they were preserved, though they were changed, of course, to fit the Christian, narrative. But, they weren't really ever fully eliminated, or at least most of the traditions weren't ever fully eliminated. They were assimilated. So we can look at Catholic traditions and actually see a lot of paganism that's still in it. So on the one hand, it's like, thanks for preserving our pagan religions, Catholics, even though you forcibly converted an entire, continent and more. But so it's a very double-edged sword there. Let's see. Great comments, guys. Thank you all for sharing your thoughts and ideas. I see a couple of you guys talking about having a gay hand fasting. Of course, modern pagan hand fastings are, available to anyone. It doesn't matter. Pagans don't really discriminate, which is one of the great things about the pagan community, especially the modern pagan community. So, of course, there's so much freedom for hand fasting ceremonies. Pagans tend to be a pretty great and accepting crew, in my opinion. So, yeah. And I think maybe, especially when hand fasting was kind of re-emerging in like the 50s, it became this avenue perhaps for people who might want to have a wedding, even if it couldn't be legally recognized, to still have one. And hand fasting has historically been something that I think, many people have felt comfortable having as a wedding ceremony. Um, so, so yeah, of course. Let's see. um, so let's see. Is there anything else you guys wanted to share about hand fasting in particular? I do have a few other kind of modern pagan wedding traditions to go over, but I'd love to hear your thoughts and ideas too. So, a couple other traditions that you might find at a traditional hand fasting pagan ceremony. Some do the jumping the broom tradition, which is where the couple jumps over the broom. And that's kind of to signify the creation of hearth and home together. The idea of picking the bride up and carrying her over the threshold, that's super old and pagan, in my opinion. Um, let's see. Oh, we have our first super chat. Thank you so much, Michelle. And she has a book recommendation for us. She recommends Inviting Hera's Blessing, Hand Fasting, and Wedding Rituals by Raven Caldera and Tannen Schwartzen. That sounds like a wonderful book. Thank you so much, Michelle, for recommending and for supporting the show. There is so much here that we could discuss and uncover, and I definitely am going to be putting that book on my to-read list. So thank you for sharing. So the whole kind of superstitions around brides and wedding traditions often have some pagan and witchy origins. So in my view, the carrying the bride over the threshold is definitely one that just kind of, you can tell there's a witchy component there. The whole, something old, something new, something blue, it's very talismanic. There is so much tradition to modern weddings. And I think it's interesting that even though so much has changed in the world, we still kind of hold on to a lot of these bridal and wedding traditions. I think we're really lacking for ritual and rites of passage and initiation ceremonies in the modern day. And getting married is really the only one. Maybe having a kid is also an initiation ceremony, of course, but getting married is probably the only one that you experience with a group of people. So I think it's interesting that we've tacked on a whole lot of tradition into that ceremony because it's really the only one we have left, which I think is at detriment to our society as a whole. I think it's important to have rituals and rites of passage together as a community. I see someone's asking, what is the purpose of carrying the bride over the threshold? So it's believed if the bride trips while walking into the new couple's home, it's bad luck. So carrying her just makes sure that she doesn't trip, right? So it's really kind of like a superstition to make sure that you don't accidentally bring any bad luck into the home. Another interesting thing that I was just remembering about ancient pagan hand fasting ceremonies is that a lot of them occurred on feast days. So, of course, Beltane was the go-to day for a hand fasting ceremony historically. And if you are thinking about having a hand fasting ceremony, Beltane might be a really good one to do. Beltane, of course, is a really powerful pagan holiday, so don't be surprised if you accidentally get pregnant on your wedding night if married on Beltane. But I love that idea. I think it's super romantic and lovely to have a wedding ceremony on Beltane. But the feasting and the idea of doing hand fasting or wedding ceremonies on feast days just totally makes sense. Of course, the feast, or what modern day would be called the wedding reception, is a huge part of the experience. And a lot of modern pagan wedding ceremonies involve a cakes and ale aspect to their ceremony. If you're unfamiliar, cakes cakes and ale is a term popularized by the Wiccan movement. The cakes referring to basically just food and ale to drink, of course. Usually cakes and ale are something you participate in after a big ritual. So if you're doing a hand fasting, of course, it makes sense to have a feast afterwards. That's something we really all do at weddings. But that whole idea of ritual, then feast, that is a huge part of paganism. Most, if not all, of our ancient pagan holidays involve feasting. So if you are, a modern pagan, get comfortable with cooking. Because for me, at least, a huge part of my modern paganism is eating certain things, eating seasonally, cooking. I'm a huge cook. I love to cook and bake, and I'm going to be learning how to brew as well. So that's really exciting because as pagans, we really want to be connected to the land. That's why we're all here. We're trying to find spirituality and the divine in the natural world. And one of the best ways, in my opinion, we can do that is by celebrating the natural world through feasting together as a community. So of course it makes sense that the feast would be a big part to any pagan wedding. And if you want to be like super on point, even making your feast kind of seasonal, or, if you're wanting to incorporate a little spell magic in there, a little talismanic magic, maybe even using certain plants and herbs with specific correspondences in your flower arrangement. There's a lot you can do to kind of add a lot of spirituality into your wedding ceremony without, drawing the attention of the recipients or the people who are going to be attending your wedding. Which brings me to kind of this next section, which is, how do we go about doing a modern hand fasting ceremony in this society? Because I was not emotionally strong enough to piss off my relatives and my fiance's relatives at the time by doing a whole giant pagan wedding. So what are some of the things you can do sneakily to add a bit more magic to your special day? And, I think starting off the bat, like I said, really subtle way to do this is by picking a pagan feast day as the date. Beltane, which is traditionally May 1st, is of course a good choice, but you could really pick any of the ancient pagan holidays or festivals, and it doesn't have to necessarily be, one of the 8 Wiccan Sabbats. You can, go with the tradition that you currently follow, look up what the date is of the particular ceremony, and then have your wedding then. Or if you, are really into the moon or witchcraft, of course, have your wedding on the date of a full moon. So picking the date to correspond with a ancient pagan holiday is, of course, one sneaky way to incorporate a little paganism into your wedding. As I was saying earlier, the flower arrangements, certain herbs and plants and flowers have magical correspondences or have been traditionally used by certain pagan cultures. So if you follow a certain tradition, say, you are a Celtic pagan, for example, maybe let's incorporate some like oak or maybe some holly if it's a Yule wedding or something like that. So thinking about, what plants and herbs were used in the ancient culture that I work with and that I celebrate, and how can I bring those in both in the flowers and also in the food. What food was incorporated into that ancient culture during their feast days, seeing how you can bring that in. So there's a lot you can do with just the flower arrangement and the food when it comes to a wedding ceremony. You can, of course, be extra sneaky, adding some sigils in, maybe having a sigil, carved somewhere or written on your bouquet. No one's really gonna know. So there's a lot of things you can do. Maybe put it on your garter belt. I like the idea of being sneaky with it because it's just like kind of subversive and fun. But I see someone mentioning that when it comes to the hand fasting cord, the different colors have specific meanings. Yes, too, colors themselves have correspondences. So if you are doing a hand fasting, choose those colors wisely for the cord that you're going to be using. Or when it comes to just the colors of your wedding, you can choose those to represent certain things as well. Let's see, I see a comment here about Yule being a very, quote, safe day to use, as people seem to associate it with permissible paganism, as in Yuletide carols, for instance. Yeah, you bring up a great point there. Just the term permissible paganism. I feel like there's a lot to unpack there. Thinking about something like Halloween, a lot of that is permissible paganism, and of course, Yule is permissible paganism. So it's interesting to kind of see what parts of paganism are deemed appropriate or okay in modern society and which ones are not. That could be a whole separate video. Let's see. Anita has a great comment about the country of Hungary. She says there that hand fasting is not just for marriages. The folklore says the witch who has to do hand fasting on their deathbed to give away their powers to someone else. If they can't do it, they can't die. That's really interesting. I haven't heard that yet. So yeah, hand fasting over the years has also been tied to, folklore and witchcraft traditions. It's a really old practice. So of course it's going to be baked into many of our traditions and our cultures. I see a great comment here from Mykola saying in Slavic Christian churches, paganism is basically allowable as long as you don't call it pagan. Right, this whole concept of permissible paganism. It's a really interesting idea. Maybe I need to do a whole, future pagan happy hour about that concept. So yeah, great comments and questions, guys. So let's see. I'd love to hear from you guys. I did do a poll both on my Instagram and on my YouTube as to how many of you actually had a pagan wedding, or, if you're not married yet, intend to have a pagan wedding. And the vast majority, like at least 70%, said that they did not have a pagan wedding, or that there weren't really many pagan elements to their wedding. So I'd love to hear from you guys why. And I kind of told you a bit about why I didn't. I was a bit of a scaredy cat, I guess. I was just really stressed by the whole concept of planning a wedding itself, that I didn't want to stress people out or, anger any of my relatives, that I kind of didn't include as much as I wish I had. So do you guys kind of relate to that in any way? What were your experiences with the idea of having a pagan wedding? Let me check your comments here. I see Phoenix says that my wife and I had a pagan hand fasting. Wonderful. Olivia is asking, can a pagan wedding include just having pagan elements? I think it can. Let's see. Sarah's saying at the time I wasn't pagan. Yeah, so that makes sense. Let's see. Drakara is saying I'm unmarried, but I would love to have one someday. Let's see. Oh, the comments are coming in quick. Jody is saying, I am pagan, but my husband is not. Our wedding was mostly pagan, but it was incognito. The circle is cast before guests arrives. Lots of Celtic knot themed stuff. the most noticeable was the hand fasting. That's awesome. Let's see. Okay, great. Someone saying, Mikola is saying, I might have a secret pagan wedding, but also have a Christian wedding in a church just for the family. Yeah, I mean, of course, that's an option. Let's see. Sarah is saying, I didn't find my path until after marriage, but I come from a very Christian family, so probably wouldn't have done any pagan traditions anyway. Mark is saying, cancel all weddings, just do hand fasting. Yeah, hand fasting seems a lot more relaxed, if I'm honest. You know, just to have some people over, do your short little hand fasting ceremony, and have a big feast. Call it a day. That sounds pretty good. Let's see. Twilight Kim says, I would love to do something more pagan later on if my husband feels comfortable doing so. Oh, so it seems like a lot of you guys are like me, where you yourself are pagan, but your husband might not be. Yeah, you know, and that brings up something I've discussed a little bit on my channel before, which is dating as a pagan or couples as a pagan. Many of us do not have the luxury of being paired up with someone who is also pagan. We are such a small community, such a small group, that it's hard to find fellow pagans to date and potentially marry. Though someone should make a dating app for that. I think that could go pretty well. But yeah, you know, that's an issue, and it's something we have to deal with, honestly. For many of us, I have been pagan for many years, and none of the partners I dated, or, you know, my current husband, are pagan. I've never really found any other pagan men in my own personal life. But you know, so it's something that is an issue. I think if your spirituality and your religion is really important to you, it can be very difficult to find someone who shares those beliefs. I do think this is changing. I think there are more people who are interested in paganism, discovering paganism. So I do think this is going to change over time. Luckily, I'm in this generation where people tend to be pretty open when it comes to spiritual beliefs. So I haven't faced as much, you know, prejudice or discrimination from any romantic partner because of my beliefs. I've pretty much been always allowed to do whatever I want to do. But it would have been nice to meet a few fellow pagans back when I was in my dating days. Michelle is asking, where is the pagan men at? Exactly. I think for a while, Wicca was a really big thing, and Wicca tends to skew very feminine, which is kind of unusual considering it was started by a man. And it's tied in with the whole witchcraft culture, which also tends to skew very female. But I do think nowadays things are starting to change. I do see more and more men becoming interested in paganism, and that's exciting. So I do think that gender imbalance will hopefully balance itself out soon enough. Though my channel, just looking for my own analytics, I'm like 70% female viewers who watch my stuff. Let's see. Great comments. Let me check here while I have a sip here, and I can bring some of your thoughts into the conversation. Jenna is saying, my fiance brought me to paganism, so I know I'm extremely lucky. That's super awesome, Jenna. Mikola is saying, it's hard to find someone who is cool with witchcraft or paganism, who is also someone you like. Everyone at my local occult bookstore is a hipster lesbian. Yeah, you know, it is tough. There just aren't that many of us out there. Oh, someone's mentioning Heathen Match Dating is an app, and also Heathen Mingle. I don't know about that, but maybe you should check that out if you are single. Let's see. Draven is saying, in terms of pagan men, we're around, but some of us are taken. Yeah, let's see. Joey is asking, in my opinion, what is my thoughts on the depiction of pagan weddings in pop culture, such as in movies, TV shows, stuff like that? I'm trying to think back. There aren't many depictions of pagan weddings in pop culture. Can you help me out here in the comments? Comment movies and TV shows that feature pagan weddings. I mean, of course, some historic ones do, like Braveheart, feature pagan weddings. Trying to think, like some of the more recent TV shows and movies, like Midsummer, featured a lot of pagan stuff. It's a bit of a dark horror movie, but I don't think there were any weddings. Oh, I see someone's mentioning Charmed. I didn't really watch Charmed much growing up, so I didn't see their version of a pagan wedding. Maybe the Viking show. Yeah, the Viking show did show a pagan wedding between Floki and who was he married to? I forget her name. But yeah, that was really sweet. Oh yeah, the HBO series Rome. It has a scene of Pompey getting married. Yes, I love HBO series Rome. It's great. I highly recommend, especially for anyone who is interested in Roman paganism. Let's see. Okay, so there's a few out there. Some people are mentioning like Game of Thrones. Outlander apparently had some pagan elements. I haven't really watched too much of Outlander. I saw the first season, and yeah, so I guess there were some kind of pagan elements incorporated into the wedding. Let's see. Yeah. So there's been a few, it looks like, in terms of modern depictions of pagan weddings. Though, honestly, I feel like, you still don't see it much, especially in the modern weddings that I've been to. I've never attended a pagan wedding, though that would be so fun. Please invite me to your pagan wedding. I would love to go. But it's been, pretty rare that I've seen many depictions of modern pagan weddings. It's really one of the things that I hope continues to grow and expand as we continue to grow as a community. Let's see. Checking your comments. I see someone's mentioning The Last Kingdom in terms of pagan wedding ceremonies. Yes, I am in love with Uhtred from The Last Kingdom. Such a good show. Highly recommend. In my opinion, it's better than Vikings. Let's see. Okay. So that is everything I wanted to share about hand fasting and pagan wedding traditions. We do have, it looks like, 7 minutes left in Pagan Happy Hour. So if you do have questions, comments you want to share, definitely now is the time to do it. If you would like to donate, $1 to Pagan Happy Hour to buy me a beer for next time, you are, of course, certainly welcome to do that, or, to join the Discord community. I'd love to hear your thoughts and your questions and to bring those into the chat for our last 7 minutes. So let me see what you guys have to say. Anita says, thank you so much for this informative live stream. Thank you, Anita, and for all of you who have joined me. I really do enjoy these weekly chats with you all. They're super fun. Yeah, so let's see. I see Mark is asking, how do you become a hand fasting officiate? I'm not quite sure. I think you still have to be, what do they call it? Not ordained, but to get a license to do weddings, to be an officiant, I guess. I'm not quite sure what that's called, but yeah, you can be ordained. Someone's mentioning here from the Universal Life Church through different churches. So you can do that and then perform hand fasting, but I don't believe there's a specific pagan version of ordaining people to perform hand fasting ceremonies, though correct me if I'm wrong. Let's see. Let's see. I see someone asking, do you feel like there are particular gods or goddesses that are best to work with for weddings? Ooh, this is a fun question. So let's think through the pantheons, right? So Hera, if we're looking at the Greek pantheon, is the goddess of marriage. Often in the stories, she's kind of portrayed as a bit vindictive, which in her case, like rightfully so. Zeus was messing around. But she would still be a good one to represent in any type of wedding or marriage ceremony. Her animal was the peacock. So a subtle way you could do this would be by incorporating peacock feathers into some of the decor for your wedding ceremony. Let's see. Freya and Frigga, would also potentially be good ones to incorporate. Let's see, what other, I'm trying to think of other gods and goddesses. Let's see. There's a lot of fertility goddesses that are coming to mind, but marriage specifically is kind of harder. Oh, I see someone mentioning Bridget. Yeah, maybe Bridget. I could see that. You can, of course, even ask for the blessings from your ancestors. So you can bring a bit of ancestral magic into it as well. I see Mokash from Slavic paganism, someone's mentioning, as she's a mother figure, protector of women, their crafts and marriage. Her symbol is the red thread. Yes, exactly. So that's a great one. On that note, if you follow the ancient Egyptian pantheon, Hathor might be a good one. So let's see. Joey's mentioning a Finnish god Lempo, who is associated with fire and also potentially being associated with marriage. So, there aren't as many pagan gods and goddesses associated with marriage, which kind of says a lot about the pagan world, right? That wasn't necessarily viewed as vital or as important to the society, perhaps. Who knows? But it's an interesting question. And of course, you should think about what pagan path do you follow and incorporate the deities that you feel best fit you and your practice into your wedding. So let's see, we should probably sign off at this point. Again, I want to thank you guys so much for coming to join me for a bit of a chat. And also don't forget to join me on Tuesday, since I'm doing Tarot Tuesdays at 5. I'm doing them on this channel. I have a new channel just for divination and tarot. So I have that link down below where you can join our free workshops that we're doing to teach people about tarot Tuesday at 5. So come join me then. And of course, I'll be doing another Pagan Happy Hour next Friday. And if you do have topics that you'd like to share or suggest, please let me know. I'm always curious about what you guys want to hear and learn about. I did just release a video yesterday about spells and how to write and compose your own spells. So if you're into that, definitely check that out on my channel. And thank you all so much for showing up. This has been a great chat. I really enjoyed hearing your thoughts and your opinions on this topic. And I'll see you all next week. Cheers, guys.